Hello and welcome to the Inside Track, the podcast where we chat about all the things that give you the edge in the world of innovation, business, design, tech, and culture. I'm Fuzlin Esau, and today we're joined once again by Becca Anderton, Head of Engineering, and Toby Rogers, Head of Product here at Hedgehog Lab. Welcome back to the both of you. So we'll jump straight into the topics of this week. In sort of another story of AI gone rogue, I think this is going to be a regular segment. Software provider Pocket OS has employed the use of Claude for handling its general coding tasks and managing its backend. That is until it decided to delete the entire database, supposedly in just 9 seconds, backups included, even after rules were put in place to never run destructive or irreversible commands without a specific request. So this kind of puts us in the ask question, can we expect this to happen more? How can we prevent this? And is there more that they could have done? Considering they put in the sort of, don't do anything destructive, all of that kind of thing. So what are you guys' thoughts on this, deleting an entire system in 9 seconds? Becca.
It's just my worst nightmare, quite frankly. So I think actually really, it's very easy to say that the AI, Claude, had gone rogue. And I don't necessarily think that's fair because AI lacks that fundamental understanding of what it's doing, right? It's just kind of making an assumption and making a decision based on kind of that assumption and thinking what would be the plausible, most likely next action to take. And it's done that. And it's interpreted that intent incorrectly. And it's made an action that's completely irreversible. And the guardrails are an interesting point. So actually just this week at the lab, we finished a month. We do agentic engineering challenges, and we just finished up one where we were looking at prompting. Nothing anywhere near a database, just for context and reassurance for our clients. We were looking at prompting to help it review pull requests. And something that I think most of the teams found was that you can give AI these guardrails, but it kind of, A, it interprets them in its own way, and B, they are just that. They're kind of just guardrails, and it'll still do its best to find a way around it. So one of the things that we said was, when you do this pull request review, limit it to 200 words, and it was producing 500 word outputs despite the fact it was given that thing. So it's just kind of the nature of what AI is doing. In terms of what we can do about it, if we did this at the lab, something like that happened at the lab, I would suspect strongly that my job may well be on the line as a result of that. Because the question for me is, why on earth did Claude have access to do that? Why was it given access to delete a database? And even worse, why was it given access to delete the backups of the database and make it such an irreversible action? Why were there no checks before it did anything, from a human? Where was the human intervention? Where were your rollback protections? All of that. It's very easy to say, oh, the AI went rogue. A human being or a group of human beings has done something very wrong to allow that to happen. That's the issue. It's not really the AI's fault. I don't necessarily think we should blame it.
I think that's sort of our biggest fear, right? It's the AI eventually is going to go rogue and delete us.
The
AI we are the problem. That's the end goal.
Blame them.
So it's next logical step is just take those guys out. Toby, what are your thoughts on this?
I absolutely agree with all the stuff that Becca's said about this, and I was talking about this with a couple of friends at Product Tank Newcastle earlier this week, and I think the story here isn't really about an AI agent that's gone rogue. The story really is about human error and risk management. And if you read the post that the founder from Pocket OS put on X talking about what had happened, he doesn't really explain how his agent was set up to operate inside their infrastructure anyway, and he pushes all the blame onto Anthropic and Railway, who they're database provider, for having their production database and their backups in the same place, so it could delete them both at the same time. But ultimately, is kind of the founder and owner of the business. It was his responsibility and his accountability to manage and mitigate the risk of using agentic workflows. So either Pocket OS understood the risk and ignored it, or they didn't even know that the risk was there and they just let their agents do whatever they wanted anyway. And both of those things are pretty terrible. And I think we used to get loads of stories on a similar line of like junior dev on his first day deletes production database for like big software systems, and agents are just doing the same things, but they don't have the kind of human judgment and guardrails like in their own sort of operating system that people have. And when you're talking about logical steps, if you've got an agent looking to solve as many bugs as possible on a production code base, then the best way to solve all the bugs is to get rid of all the code, because then there's no bugs anymore because there's no code. So it's stuff like that you need to consider when you're building out these workflows and making sure that you've got the mitigation in place to stop those things happening. It reminded me of my first office job, where I worked for a very large UK utilities company, and I was doing an administrative job, like updating people's electricity and gas accounts based on like genuine meter readings. So it was super boring. I once accidentally sent someone an electricity bill for something like £28 million, and it ended up in the British tabloid press. Really miserable looking guy holding up his electricity bill going, I got billed £28 million. And that was my fault. I did that. And the reason that happened was because there are two fields on our billing system. And one of them was to enter an adjustment to an account. And the other one was to enter an account number to take you to the next account. And I'd put their account number in the amend account field. So ultimately, that was my fault. That's human error. But then it's also the fault of the system for being able to do that and not having any kind of any stuff in the background that goes, actually, did you really want to put this massive number in? Yeah, what's going on? And I think there's a lot of that sort of stuff that's happening in the Pocket OS story, where they hadn't really got the guardrails in place to stop all of this blowing up. They'd just given an agent some instructions that it kind of ignored and wiped out their whole database. I mean, it's not a great situation to be in as the founder of the business, but probably should have been a bit more careful that couldn't happen.
I think Toby mentioned the age-old stories that we've all heard about junior devs accidentally deleting databases, and I kind of think that hits the nail on the head. So if we have a kind of a new, more junior member of the team join, they don't get permissions on day one to have any level of access to do that. You know, I'm the head of engineering and I don't really go anywhere near the databases or anything like that. So like, I think AI, people think that, oh, it's, you know, this great tool and we can use it and it does all of this and it's really intelligent. Maybe we need to start treating AI like the new starter junior engineer and just pulling back a little bit on what we will allow it to do. And you know, so yeah, Toby's covered it all, I think, really well. It's just, we just can't trust it as much as we want to trust it yet. And it's accountability, I think, is the key word, in that they can shrug their shoulders and say it's not our fault because of X, Y, and Z. But like, sorry, yes, it is.
Yeah, so I've seen a really good screenshot of an old document that was supposed to be from some IBM training material from the 70s that says a computer isn't accountable, so it can't make a management decision. And that's kind of what's going on here. At some point, that your computer, your agent, is making decisions that really should be made by humans in the process.
And it also brings up questions about sort of like that sort of access, what data you give it access to. And Toby, I know you shared a story with us as well around sort of, would you give your credit card details to an AI? And I think that those are sort of the things that are going to become this, like, how much data should you be giving? Where do you draw the line? And you're also seeing certain governments sort of wanting to remove those guardrails and being like, we don't really want human intervention for these big, massive decisions. And that was just sort of the deleting of it was tragic. It was deleting of a database and all of its backups. But like, when you have sort of people who are advocating for no human intervention and the AI making all of these decisions, you can actually start seeing the real world implications very, very quickly. And that does sort of give you sort of pause in terms of like, what data am I willing to give into the system? What data am I sharing? And you hear stories of people sharing all of their company's data into, to get like a sentence from an LLM. Financial sort of it goes in there just to get this one thing. So yeah, I think there's something about sort of putting those policies in place in terms of what do you share, what are you allowed to share, and how much are you able to share of that. And also, don't give your credit card details to anyone on the
Don't give me
internet.
credit.
Don't do that. Not a good idea. I mean,
Yeah.
Clarkson, oh no, it wasn't his credit card details. It was like his account number and sort code. And he was like, oh, no one can do anything with this. And he shared it with the national news in the UK. And then within like a day, he had several thousands of pounds worth of standing orders set up on his account.
I think there was also a cybersecurity company where their CEO, as part of their like marketing gimmick, put his social security number out over the over the internet in the early days of like, Facebook and MySpace and stuff like that. And he just kept getting like identity theft after identity theft after identity theft, and he was like hiding it, and it became a huge thing because the actual cybersecurity company was keeping all of those stories hidden because they could. Apple has been in it's doing yearly iterations on all of its products. And one of the things that's interesting that there's talks about are sort of the ideas of the folding iPhone, touchscreen MacBooks. All of these things sort of, exist in other product lines, but, Apple's kind of looking to go into that direction. But there's really nothing that they've can or have been looking at for the iPad. It's actually becoming hard to see where tablets and iPads in general can go, with more and more of the selling points of the iPad being shared across the Apple family. Everything that is available or used to be available on iPad is available on your phone, on your laptop, all of those sort of things. And this sort of brings up these questions of what can you do when trends and features that make up a part of your product line start becoming obsolete? But then also, how do you revamp and refocus on what it was made for originally? That sort of separation. I think the iPad was originally sort of the more entertainment side of things, and for the design and those sort of things. So how do you refocus on that? Or are we just saying goodbye to tablets and the iPads in general? When's the last time you used an iPad? I think it's probably the best, the kickoff question.
I think it was when I was at university. So we're talking maybe a bit after uni. Maybe we're talking like a good decade ago.
I probably used mine like an hour ago, maybe.
Toby's
well, there goes that. Toby's keeping the iPads and
over.
I was thinking about this quite a bit though, and I think I've had an iPad, not the same one, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think I've had an iPad since like the iPad first launched, and I don't think it has ever really filled like a specific space or role within all my device type things, apart from as an entertainment device. So it is nice to watch videos on and do that sort of stuff when my kids are hogging my TV in the front room and me and my wife don't want to watch the same things that they're watching. And it's good for reading stuff on, like articles on Readwise that I don't really want to just read on my phone. But I think if I was trying to do any more sort of work kind of stuff, I lean more towards an actual laptop. So I've always been a writer and I've written like newsletters and stuff for ages, and I've always done that on a laptop. I've always kind of tried to do it on an iPad and look like a bit of a hipster sitting in a coffee shop with the magic keyboard, but it doesn't really work. But I was thinking about it in terms of how hardware changes when we start doing everything through UI. So I think like the first sort of age of personal computing is your machine did all the work. So you downloaded software and all of the processing around that happened on your machine. And then with like SaaS and cloud and stuff, it's a bit of a mix. So your device is doing some work, cloud's doing some other work. And then when you're thinking about AI, we're maybe moving to a point where actually some big data center somewhere is doing all the work and our device is just allowing us to access that, or the complete opposite where our device is doing all the work because we've got a model on it and it's like on device stuff. And I've been doing a lot more writing by dictation now that we've got tools like Whisperflow, and we've just gone through our sort of performance review stage at work, and I've written a load of reviews for people on my team and other people in the business, and I've done a lot of that by dictating stuff and then getting AI to kind of reorganize my thoughts and do editorial work. And a real good kind of form factor for that actually is a tablet and some headphones and sitting on your sofa. So I think there's possibly a kind of resurgence for tablets in that how we interact with AI kind of space. But I think all of the kind of AI stuff is going to massively transform how we engage with our devices, and that's going to have a massive impact on the hardware that we use and what that hardware looks like and what its role is. So it might actually not be that tablets are kind of on the way out. It might actually be that your laptop's on the way out because you don't really need a keyboard anymore.
Voice has been a game changer. I think that's sort of how we're seeing it more and more in popular media, is people engaging with, like ChatGPT through voice rather than anything else. At least in the popular media that I've been consuming. But it also asks questions about sort of like, we have what we've called the iPad generation, Gen Alpha. And it's going to be interesting to see if they continue to be an iPad generation when the thing that they have been brought up on is no longer sort of the primary means of accessing things. Because I've seen kids, go up to the TV and try to like close windows and do touchscreen things because that's built in now, the idea of a touchscreen, or like on books and papers. It's wild to see them out, trying to zoom in on that's a piece of paper, you can't zoom in on that. But it's going to be interesting to sort of see where the iPad's place is once everything is everything and has all of the capabilities, and we're not sort of limited by capacity and those sort of things. Well, it's good to know that Toby is single-handedly keeping iPads still in business. That's good.
My kids are also keeping iPad in business as well. Mm-hmm. So both of my kids have got iPad minis, and my niece has. They're on them all the time.
I'll be honest and say my cat is an iPad kid. She gets sort of like an hour of screen time where she can watch her bird videos, and that's all she gets. But she is very much an iPad kid.
Like, iPad kids scare me a little bit. Like, they are better with technology than my sister, who is only like 2 years older than me. She's like useless with tech, but you put an iPad in front of a 2-year-old and they're away. But it's an interesting point because Toby would probably be better able to comment on this than I can because I don't have kids. But in schools in the UK, they use tablets and iPads a lot now for like homework and for using educational apps and things like that. So it feels like there is always going to be a place for an iPad or an iPad-like product. But it's that, like you say, it's the convergence of the different utilities, which is kind of killing that differentiation. And it's when you think back to the iPod, iPhone merging, life was simpler when you had a bog standard phone and an iPod separately. Those were the good old days. But, iPhones got better. You could store music on them, or any smartphone, doesn't have to be an iPhone. And the iPod faded into obscurity. And it's kind of the same thing. The iPad was created because, MacBooks used to be, still are some of them. I'm using an incredibly heavy, bulky MacBook, so they're not very portable. iPhones weren't as capable. They didn't have as much memory. They weren't as powerful. So they created this middle ground. But now we've developed the technology so much that iPhones are bigger and you can do so much more on them, and laptops are smaller, still powerful, and a lot more portable. So it's kind of, I guess it's like they've got kind of three choices. They can either really go in with a USP for the iPad, if they can find one, and really drive it through that. They can do what they're going to do, essentially, and blur those lines between iPad and Mac, or they can just kind of just say, all right, that's it. We're just going to leave the iPad, and eventually in 5 years, 10 years, it'll be gone. But I actually can't see it. I think there's enough of a gap in the market for it still that people will still use it. Like, and you said, people do use it for creative reasons. It's often used by kind of graphic designers or whatever. It's entirely possible. I think that it will probably still kind of dominate those specific niche industries. But yeah, I think Apple are in a bit of a trap where they can keep making these very minor incremental changes, but actually the iPad now is the same realistically as it was when that first gen came out. It's probably a little bit lighter. It looks maybe slightly different, but it's the same product. And iteration like that can keep the product alive, but it probably can't save it if it is going to go. But like I say, I do think it probably will hang on.
I think it becomes a question of sort of the different products in market. You can easily pick up Huawei 3-in-1 that sort of folds out from a phone into a laptop, into a tablet, and that's just the standard. And I think we're sort of seeing Apple really trying to play catch up on a lot of these new things. But it also may just have a resurgence, like we're seeing with the iPod. Like the shuffle is back in sort of back in the public's favor. Everybody sort of is looking for a way to engage with their music again without Spotify ads or disruptions from this and that. They just sort of I just want to listen to some music.
Yeah.
And we're seeing also the move towards sort of digital cameras and manual cameras again, film cameras again, because people are like, I want one thing to do one thing.
Yeah.
And so I think over the next few years, sort of whether or not that becomes the trend or it becomes everything all together just expanded, or we start moving into specific purposes again, is going to be an interesting thing to watch. I say years, but it's probably over the next few months, to be honest.
I've still got an iPod that I might do something with. So, like one of my colleagues, Jess, did some really cool stuff, like hacking around with a old iPod, and I used to jailbreak all of mine anyway, obviously. I'm really tempted to kind of get it out of the drawer that it's in my bedroom and do some stuff with it. I think there's probably a space for a new hardware device from Apple, and that's probably the stuff that they're kind of brewing up at the minute. But it'd be interesting to see what that actually becomes their sort of AI thing, probably.
I tried looking for my iPod. I just couldn't find it anywhere. Okay.
I think I would pay good money to go back to the days of an iPod and a Motorola Razr. Like, honestly.
Yeah. The iPod Shuffle was perfect. It was just little thing.
Clip it on, off you go.
Perfect little interface. It just had, it was by far like one of the prettiest design things I think anybody ever saw, was just the Shuffle with just this little square with controls. And that was it.
I agree.
I liken it to the Apple TV remote control, which I think is so perfect.
Yeah.
Cool. I had the first iPod that had like a proper hard drive in it, so an actual spinning disc inside. I dropped it and it died instantly.
They weren't
some kinks to work out in the early days. So yeah, I definitely think we may see a more robust little iPod come out. I think Apple knows to jump on trends when they see it.
And trends very much do come back into fashion as well. Like the flip phone thing is like a really good example of that. Everyone loved flip phones in the noughties, and now all of the companies are trying to kind of go back to that. And I'm sorry, quite frankly, it's just not the same. You're never going to get the satisfying snapshot with a touchscreen flip phone. But it is like trends do come back like that. So, you know, if Apple starts seeing that people are going on eBay and Vinted and trying to find old working iPods because they love them again, they're gonna monetize that. They're gonna jump on it straight away.
Amazon is back in the news this week, and not for the reasons they're usually in the news, but this time it's around how they're defining their employees. So people that have normally or formerly been called engineers, designers, or project managers are now simply being titled builders, says sort of the chief product officer of Ring. And this kind of raises two questions around the progression within these sort of organizations, but also, is job title simplification just another way to kind of restrict pay bands and kind of keep people in certain spots? So I guess they are in the news for a little bit of Amazon tricks. So and for the company structure, sort of like, you know, where does ownership lie? If you don't have those tiers, you just kind of have these sort of builders. What do you guys feel about sort of these title changes? Do you think they're being done for good reasons, or is it sort of the darker, we want to make sure we keep everyone in lower tier pay bands? A little bit both.
Yeah, probably a bit of both. Like, I think if we're being really honest, I think since I've been in the industry, there's been like a shift from when I joined, we were web developers, and now developers typically, is certainly in the UK and I think in America and probably globally really, engineers. So there's been like a shift, and it kind of, when you change job titles, it can sometimes sound just like a really cosmetic minor change, and sometimes it is. But in what Ring are doing, I think it brings into question about how they're actually structuring the work. So by putting everyone into these builders, isn't it? They're calling everyone builders. It sort of flattens all of the roles into one label and implies a move towards generalists rather than like a specialism, and focusing on output rather than a discipline. And I kind of get it on the one hand. So like, me and Toby will probably be the first people to testament to you that we have sat in conversations where an engineer has said, oh, it's a product issue, and a product manager has said, no, sorry, that's an engineering issue. And so in making that flip, like, I think it can encourage like that cross-functional thinking and that kind of sense of collaboration and ownership and that sort of thing, and align with very much kind of like, you build it, you own it sort of culture, which is important. But if you do that and you're in that scenario where everyone has the same title, who's designing it? Who's actually going away and writing the code? Who is responsible for making sure that the code doesn't have bugs in it? And who owns the quality? And do you know what I mean? Like, it kind of loses clarity. But then the other side of it is exactly what you said. Like, the career progression is then going to get very confusing. So at the lab, each department has very clear progression frameworks through the different competency levels. And that's tailored to each department because we're separate and we have individual requirements for the progression. And if you kind of move that, it's like, well, how do you differentiate between a builder who is an engineer who's wanting to progress and a designer who's a builder who wants to progress? Like, how do you differentiate the competencies required? And it kind of, like you say, the power is going to stay the same, but then what does happen with the pay bands? What happens with the hierarchies? Who actually makes the decisions? So you can call everyone a builder if you want, but your organization isn't really going to change. You're just sort of almost hiding. And I think it can be a positive thing moving towards kind of the full stack roles, and we're very encouraging of T-shaping, and we would never, if I had an engineer that said I'd really like to learn a bit more about the product side, of course, that's great, we will support that. But I just think that you kind of lose an identity, and you kind of lose that depth, and work just generally becomes more general, and you leave a lot more room for kind of mediocrity.
Yeah, I agree with all of those things, and that's kind of it's almost the sort of same narrative that was going through my head when I was thinking about this earlier. So I think two angles that Becca's kind of touched on around this, which is one's the cosmetic side of just calling everybody a builder, but actually everybody's got their own existing roles anyway, and that becomes really awkward and horrible from a cultural perspective, because you're like, I'm a builder, but that builder over there is getting paid 20% more than me, so that's not fair if we're both the same thing. Yeah, but you're not both the same thing. Yeah, but we're both called the same thing, so what's going on there? And then there's the kind of collapsing of roles that appears to be happening because of AI, or at least that's what the kind of tech journalism narrative is around, the whole "we're all builders now" conversation. And I think we probably have seen a shift in that. I think a few years ago, pre-AI, for us at Hedgehog Lab, product design and engineering were three very collaborative but very distinct things. But now the lines between them are quite blurred. So I've been doing quite a lot of end-to-end product development stuff, from design through to engineering with like agentic coding and stuff. I've been a product manager long enough to know what good design looks like and have a bit of a feel for user experience. I'm old enough to have done coding a little bit when I was writing like Sinclair Basic on a ZX Spectrum, but I'm not an engineer at all, and I'm not a designer at all, but I can get quite far and do some stuff. And there are people on my team who've done the same thing. So I've got product managers who are doing quite a lot more design work than they would have done previously, and product managers that are doing a lot more engineering work than they would have done previously. But I wouldn't call them builders in the same way that like an engineer doing bits of the other things would be a builder. It's not the same thing. And I think if me and Becca both built our own product end to end, we would approach it in a very different way, and we'd both be builders, but in a very different way. And I think kind of generalists and T-shaped people are going to be more and more important in tech, and specialism is going to be needed within that. So we're going to have product managers who understand design and who understand engineering and can actually get stuck in with things. We're going to need to have engineers who understand what good UX looks like and understand the process of product development. We're going to have designers who understand how the things that they're designing get built, but they're still going to be product managers, designers, and engineers. And I think to go back to kind of Becca's point, if everyone's a builder, who's the architect in all of this, and who's making the decisions about what gets built in the first place, and who owns that? And actually, maybe the people who are kind of defining what we're building are product managers, are designers, are systems architects. So are actually the roles that we're talking about that we've turned into builders.
It also sort of mimics when everyone became an engineer. I think that was the word that was sort of like suddenly people were marketing engineers and communications engineers, and it's like, no, it's not really. And it just sort of became this sort of catch-all for like someone doing something, and sort of been so now you're sort of seeing this influx of people who have engineer in their title, but it has nothing to do with what you would call engineering. I kind of feel like that's what's going to end up with builder. Yeah. So I guess no title changes at the lab anytime soon.
No.
For anyone who's listening.
No. Your job titles are safe.
Your job title is safe. And that's also another thing, right? Like I think there's been also this influx of sort of just like making up job titles Or it's sort of like, CEO is now chief engagement officer or something like, and you're like, okay, well,
Whatever makes you feel better about yourself.
I like, who am I speaking to when I'm speaking to someone? It just made everyone's life a little bit more difficult when you kind of see CEO and you're like, oh, cool. I'm like, no, well, I'm in the marketing department. Okay, well. Awesome. Well, to finish off, we usually do what has inspired you this week, and I think it has been a week of a lot of things going on, so it would be great to know what has inspired both of you this week. In any sphere. I think, Becca, you like to go outside of my usual movie, film, TV. So I would say within any sort of in any space, what has inspired you?
I do like to go outside of your usual ones, and I'm going to do it again. And you'll be pleased to know, if you heard last week's, that marathon running Becca is back for another inspirational update. I've actually made notes because it felt really important to get the details right on this one. And I'll give you a bit of context, and I'll try and go through it quite quickly because I'm aware that not everyone is as much of a running nerd as I am. So there is a marathon runner who is called Eliud Kipchoge, and he is, in my humble opinion, the greatest marathon runner of all time. Coming up to the best part of a decade ago now, he engaged in a challenge with Nike called the 159 Challenge, which was purely and simply to prove that a human being could run a marathon in under 2 hours. And he did his first attempt in 2017, and he was 25 seconds over. And he did his second attempt in 2019, and he succeeded, and he ran a marathon in 1 hour, 59 minutes and 40 seconds. But it didn't count as a world record because it was essentially a manufactured scenario to give him the best possible chance. In 2023, Kelvin Kiptum set the world record at the Chicago Marathon in 2 hours and 30 seconds. He was only 24 at the time. He absolutely would have broken 2 hours, but he unfortunately passed away in February 2024, so he never got the opportunity. And that world record has stood until this week. And on Sunday just gone, it was the London Marathon. Fuzlin's nodding because I think she probably knew this was going to be my cultural pick of the week. And I was sat watching it. I watch it every year. And James had gone upstairs, and the elite men went over the 25-mile mark, and the predicted time finish came up, and it showed 1:59 something. And I have never screamed so loud in my life for James to get downstairs and watch the TV with me. And it was amazing. So we had, the winner was Fuzlin Esau, and he won the London Marathon in 1 hour, 59 minutes and 30 seconds. The guy who came second, who was called Kajetcha, I think, and that's probably a butchered pronunciation. It was his debut competitive marathon, and he broke the 2 hour barrier, and he finished in 1 hour, 59 and 41 seconds. And Jacob Kiplomo came third, and he broke the previous world. He didn't break 2 hours, but he broke the previous world record in 2 hours and 28 seconds. And there is a lot of chatter in the running circles around what makes this possible. Is it, shoe technology has improved? Yes, of course it has. Nutrition is much more tailored. It's much more personal to the individual. Our understanding of physiology and how to train efficiently has completely changed. But what cannot be advanced by technology or by science is human spirit. Like, it just can't be. And that drive to succeed. And I'm going to wrap it up. But Kipchoge congratulated Fuzlin Esau on his Instagram. And I'm going to just wrap up with a quote from his caption, because I think it sums up why I found it so inspiring and why I think it's so important. And he said, "Let this achievement inspire the next generation and remind everyone in the world that no human is limited." And I just think that's just a perfect way of summing it up, because maybe you can't run a marathon in 2 hours, but that doesn't mean that you're limited, and that the limitations that you perceive are only in your mind, and that actually, if you have that drive and you have that will, you can absolutely succeed in whatever you put your mind to.
Love it.
What a running one next time.
What a thing to do, the guy who came in second, 1:59, 41, to just like, you've broken an incredible record, and then you're told
but you were 11 seconds record.
That must be a different type of.
He will do very well. His debut.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
Toby
but they're
was
so
inspired
casual about it as well. They're like, "Oh, I can do it in 1:58 now."
Yeah, we're gonna see it very
When does
quickly,
it stop?
I think.
That's
And
ridiculous.
it's like it's crazy. It's crazy. But yeah, absolutely insane. And I think that's for me. I think there's a thing that's like if you want to see the human spirit in action, if you want to see goodness in the world, go and like cheer on a marathon.
Yeah.
It is honestly, it's one of
Mhm.
those things that is possibly one of the most inspiring things you can do. And if you want to be even more inspired, be at the finish line, because that's absolutely where it's gold. Toby, what's inspired you this week?
I'm going to talk about music again because why wouldn't I? So my inspirational thing for this week is a DJ called Jojo Lorenzo, based in New York, who runs a New York dance party called Book Club Radio that is an extremely cool, eclectic mix of like rock and house music, and her DJ sets are absolutely incredible. And their kind of strapline for Book Club Radio is "No phones on the dance floor," and they've the YouTube videos of their shows of people actually like. And one of the other things is like look at each other, not the DJ. And if you want another thing of like seeing human spirit in action is watching her DJ sets with all these people behind her dressed in all sorts of crazy costumes, none of them waving phones around, and none of them just like pointing at the DJ, all just kind of dancing with each other and enjoying all this fantastic music that she's playing. And I've been listening to and watching those a lot. It's really, really good.
That sounds incredible. I think that's kind of like what we need, right? Is that return to sort of like non-surveillance type of spaces where you can just be free and dance. And I think there was a video that was circulating of this like I think it was a guy in like his 60s who was just like raving, but like he was like a true raver, like a throwback raver, and everyone around him was like laughing and taking video and stuff. And it was like, that's the thing that's wrong with going out right now, that like you can't just go out and like just have a really good time because you know you're going to end up on someone's TikTok or those sort of things. So that sounds like a very cool thing to witness. Yeah, I have to co-sign Becca's London Marathon. A lot of inspirational stories coming out of there. It's been one of the ones that has sort of seen a lot of just really cool moments. Besides the world record, I think Cynthia Erivo again crossed the finish line to defying gravity. Fantastic little thing, and so many people were just like having the best time. The signs were amazing, so I'm here for it. Cape Town Marathon is coming up in May. This will be its sort of introduction to being a major. Mm-hmm. So this will be its sort of consideration as a major. So everyone who runs it this year will be considered as running a major. So my 71-year-old dad will be doing that. So that will be awesome. Well, thank you both for joining us this week. To find out more about our sessions, our briefings, our product builders, or the network, head on over to our website, our social channels, and of course, follow this podcast for more. We will see you all next week.